Hello and welcome from the New York Society Library. I'm Sarah Elliott Holliday, Head of Events, and I am delighted to welcome you from all over, it looks like, and at all different times of day, so thank you, to welcome all of you and to say just a very brief word about our speaker this afternoon. First, full disclosure, in 2001, I got married and my husband published his first book of theater criticism. His publisher, who shall remain nameless, having declined to offer any assistance with this element, I stayed up all night rendering my husband's page reference notes into a usable index prior to his deadline. That was my wedding present. I'm kidding, but seriously, if I didn't have any appreciation of the humble index before then, that sure was a crash course in realizing both the depth and the amount of work that goes into that oft overlooked part of the book. Dennis Duncan's Index, A History of Thee, gives us all book lovers a fresh eye for indices and those who make them. He is a lecturer in English at University College London, whose writing has appeared in The Guardian, The Times Literary Supplement, and the London Review of Books. He's also the co-editor of a book called Book Parts. Index, A History of Thee, has received many good reviews, including being named a New York Times Editor's Choice book. Stephen Moore in the Washington Post called it an adventure and bookish in the most appealing sense. From ancient Egypt to Silicon Valley, Duncan is an ideal tour guide, witty, engaging, knowledgeable, and a fount of diverting anecdotes. But I also like the mention in BBC History magazine, as Duncan poignantly observes, for as long as the old-fashioned paper and ink book remains the dominant symbol of our intellectual endeavors, enriching the mind will involve navigating printed matter, and the index will be our compass. Here's Dennis Duncan to tell us more.
Oh, thanks so much, Sarah. Hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully you can hear me at the back. It's very, very nice to be with you. So I will give you a few of these anecdotes from the history of the book index. The thing that I hear the most or heard the most during the 7 or 8 years that I was writing this was people who would say a history of the book index. Isn't that a bit niche? Isn't that a bit niche? And yet, what I say is that we live in the age of search. Our phones, tablets, laptops, they all open onto a bottomless well of information from which we can draw freely. As we talk, read, watch TV, our fingers twitch restlessly over our devices. What else was she in? Or who did he used to play for? I thought they were dead. So I say, when did you last use a search engine? Or Alexa? Or hit Control F to jump through a document? I'm just going to share my screen with you. Let's see how this goes. This is the trickiest bit of the presentation. I'm just going to share my screen with you so I can show you Matt Cutts. Matt Cutts is a Google engineer. And in a document called How Search Works, a video, he says that the first thing to understand is that when you do a Google search, you aren't actually searching the web, you're searching Google's index of the web. The history of the index then is a history of how we ended up where we are now. After all, the technology that underpins our information age can be traced back to the Middle Ages. Indexes, plural index, I'm going to pick Sarah up on that. Indexes, always indexes, not indices, are one of those inventions that are so successful, so integrated into our daily practices, they can often become invisible. But the next time you look something up at the back of a book or on the internet, remember that you're using a tool invented by monks in the 13th century to speed up the way that they used their books. Let's see one of them. Here we go. The index is one of those inventions, like the light bulb or like mathematical calculus, that was invented twice at the same time, invented simultaneously. The moment was so ripe for it, the need was so pronounced that two people in different places invented it. The first of these, we're talking about the year 1230, so the start of the 13th century, and we're talking about France and England, Paris and Oxford. The first person we're going to look at is Hugh of Cher. Hugh is the abbot of the Dominican friary on the left bank in Paris. It's just on the city wall. If you go to Paris nowadays, it's around about where the Pantheon stands, the great mausoleum built in the 18th century. In the 13th century, there's a brand new Dominican priory. And in 1230, a new abbot took over called Hugh of Cher. This is a fresco, 14th century fresco from Italy of Hugh. And what's interesting about it is this is the first depiction of a person wearing glasses. This is the earliest illustration of somebody wearing glasses. Hugh actually wouldn't have been able to wear glasses. It's a slight anachronism that Hugh was just a few decades too early, but I like the idea that he's wearing glasses. What glasses connote to us nowadays, I think, is a kind of bookish meticulousness, maybe a sort of pedantry. What Hugh did when he took over at Cher was he got all of the friars there working on a grand project. And the project was to break the Bible in its entirety, its entirety down into its individual words, and then to rearrange those words into alphabetical order. Hugh was creating a word index of the Bible, so the 10,000 most used nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs. He didn't go in for the little particles, but the 10,000 main words in the Bible and the 129,000 different places they appear, deconstructing the Bible, rearranging it into alphabetical order with a list of all the places that you could find these words. What this allowed was a new type of preaching that was more dynamic. If you want to give a sermon on the theme of bread, you can say, well, I'm going to start off with the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. But then I'm going to jump back to the Old Testament, to the manna from heaven. Then I'm going to pivot back to the New Testament, to the feeding of the 5,000, bread and fishes. All of this you can do by looking up the word panis in the index and seeing what it's got for you. So you can write these interesting, dynamic sermons because you have the whole Bible broken down into something that's easily searchable. It's such an achievement, and he uses such a system of abbreviations that you can get a word index to the Bible in a book. This is a medieval manuscript in the Bodleian in Oxford, and I've just put an index card like this alongside it to show you can reorder the Bible into alphabetical order and still have it in a pocketbook. It's quite an incredible achievement, but it's a word index. Now, across the channel in Oxford, we find Robert Grosseteste. This is a picture from an illuminated manuscript, a picture of Grosseteste. I don't know if he's preaching or maybe reading a poem. Grosseteste is an enormous polymath. He can do everything. He's read everything. He's a scientist. He's a preacher. He's probably Chancellor of Oxford University round about 1228, 29. He goes on to become Bishop of Lincoln. He really is a man for all seasons, if you like. And to go with that, he has read everything. Anything that you hear about Robert Grosseteste from the 13th century will mention his encyclopedic reading. This is the guy who has simply read everything. And in order to use that knowledge, he needs to be able to re-access it, to remember, where did that idea come from? So what Grosseteste develops is the subject index, the index that doesn't need a specific word, but whenever he sees a particular topic, he writes a list of about 400 ideas that he's interested in. And for each of those ideas, he designs a little symbol. So the idea of the Holy Trinity will just be 3 dots. The idea of the imagination will just be a flower. And each time he encounters that idea in his encyclopedic reading, he jots it down in the margin. So hopefully on the slide here, you can see the margins of Grosseteste's surviving books. Some of the books that he used to use still are in libraries in Oxford and Cambridge. And running down the margins like a stream of emoticons is a stream of these symbols saying, in this passage, we see the Trinity, we see dreams, we see imagination, we see animals, or whatever it is. Now, this allows him to go back through the margins, just skimming them and saying, where are all the moments that I encountered imagination? Okay, I'm going to add that to my grand index. So there's a single manuscript in the library at Lyon in France, which is Grosseteste's master index. All of the times that he's written each of these signs, he keeps a list for each of them. These are all the moments I see in the Trinity. I see it in St. Augustine here, I see it in Aristotle here, I see it in the Bible here, and so on. So what he has here is like a sort of parchment Google, a universal index for the guy who's read everything of where all of the ideas that he's interested in can appear. So we have the difference now between the word index, the index that as long as you use a particular word, it will tell you where that word is, and the subject index, the index where it's not the specific word, but it's the idea that's in. Grosseteste reads many languages. He can read Greek, he can read Latin, he can read French, he can read English. So wherever things appear in any language, whatever word is being used, no, whatever idea, not words being used, he has an index for that. Both of these indexes are created around about the year 1230 in order to speed people up reading their books. Now, because we're still thinking about medieval manuscripts, we have a problem. Just going to jump ahead with the slides here. Because we're still thinking about medieval manuscripts, we have a problem. All of these indexes, they really catch on. People are starting to use them all over the place, but they only apply to an individual copy of a book. When we're in the manuscript era, before the invention of printing, pagination isn't stable. You and I might both have a copy of this book that I've got on the screen. It's a history book called the Polychronicon. It's from the 14th century. You've got a copy, I've got a copy, but your copy is that size and my copy is that size, and your copy is 300 pages long and my copy is only 150 pages long. Every copy of every book until the 1450s really is a copy. It took a monk to copy it out by hand, taking literally months to produce an exact copy of the text. But they're so concerned about making sure they copy the text right, they're not at all worried about keeping it on exactly the same pages. And this causes a problem. So I'll show you this book. This is a history book from the 1350s, a man called Ranulph Higden. It's a history of the world from the very beginning, from the creation of the world up until the early 1300s, up until I think Edward II. So really everything is there. And the copy that I'm showing you here is in a library in St. John's College, Cambridge. And this was copied out in the 1380s. So it was copied out about 30 years after Higden wrote the original. It's had some famous owners. I'll just show you John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's magician, has signed his name on one of the pages. Johannes Dee, 1573. He's even dated it November the 13th. But we're not interested in the Queen's magician here. So I'll make him disappear. What I'm interested in is the man who did the copying, the man who actually wrote that text out. Not the person who initially wrote the history, but the man who copied out this particular copy of the book. It was a man called John Lutton. I haven't got a very good photo of it, but you might be able to see in the very bottom corner of the slide, he said, qui scripsit librum John Lutton est sibi nomen. John Lutton is his name. John Lutton is a monk from Cheshire in central England, and he was the copyist here. He's got to the end of the book, and like a lot of copyists do, because they've invested so much time, they sign it like an artist. John Lutton wrote this book. Only then John realizes that he hasn't quite finished. He hasn't done the index yet. So what you see in that second column there with the big capital A and another capital A further down is the start of the index to the history of the world. Now, in the 14th century, indexes often start with a how-to. So that first paragraph there is just telling us how to use the index. Translate some of it. John Lutton has written this out. First of all, note the leaf numbers in the top right corners. These represent the number of each written leaf, as you might expect. Then consult the table wherever you please. So look something up in the alphabetical table, whatever you want to find. For example, Alexander destroyed the city of Tyre except for the family of Strato, 72 to 3. The number 72 indicates the leaf where such a number, 72, is written in the corner, as discussed further up. And by rooting out that number, the said matter of Alexander and Strato will be found. So I'm sitting in the library in Cambridge with this medieval manuscript in front of me. I think I'll give it a go. I turn to page 72, and what do I find? Nothing like it. Here's page 72. Alexander isn't mentioned at all. That capital S there is for Seleucus. That's one of Alexander the Great's successors. Alexander is dead by page 72. Very strange. So I flick back looking for the city of Tyre, the destruction of the city of Tyre, and sure enough, I can find it, but it's on page 66. What's happened here is John Lutton, copying out the index, hasn't realized that indexes in manuscripts only work if you keep the pagination the same as the index that you're copying from. So poor old John Lutton has copied out an index, and it's basically like if you have a web page where every single link takes you to a 404 page not found error. He totally hasn't understand how indexes work. And what's happened here is, hopefully you can see this from the slide, a few decades later, somebody else has started using this book and realized this index is hopeless. And what they've done is they've scratched the parchment out. You can see where the just underneath the number, the parchment suddenly goes darker, and rewritten the whole index. They didn't do it in the how-to section at the top, but the whole index has had to be written in a slightly later hand because poor old John didn't realize what he was doing. The problem was going to be solved a few decades later, overnight, with the invention of printing, but just 6 or 7 decades too late for John Lutton. This is the first printed page number. I say the problem was solved. I'm going to read you a little bit from the book, if you don't mind, but I'm just going to explain what this slide represents for me. So, sorry, I'm going to read. I'm in the Bodleian Library in Oxford with a small printed book open on the desk in front of me. This is the text of a sermon, and it's printed in 1470 in Cologne at the print shop of a man called Arnold Terhernen. The book is no larger than a paperback, and the text itself is short, just 12 leaves, 24 pages long. But sitting here in the library with the book before me and opened on its first page is, I think, the most intense experience that I've had of the archival sublime, that sense of disbelief that something so significant, something of such conceptual magnitude, should be here on my desk among my workaday effects, my laptop, notebook, pencil. It feels astonishing that I should be allowed to pick it up, hold it, turn its pages as though it were a novel that I'd purchased at a train station. Why is it not under glass, sealed off, labelled and exhibited where crowds of school children might look but not touch? There's a name for this feeling: Stendhal syndrome, after the French novelist who on a visit to Florence described the palpitations he experienced at being so close to the tombs of the Renaissance masters. I feel like I'm on the verge of tears. The sermon was written by Werner Rollevink, a monk from the Cologne Charterhouse. Rollevink would become famous for writing the Fasciculus Temporum, or the Little Bundle of Dates, another history of the world from the first day of creation to the bleeding edge of the present. In this case, the 3rd of May, 1481, the date on which Rollevink informs us that the Ottoman Emperor, Mehmet II, went to hell for his wickedness. But the lengthy and complex Fasciculus was still a work in progress when Rollevink penned this short sermon to be preached on the feast of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, 21st of November. If the truth be told, however, it's neither Rollevink nor his preaching that make this book special for me. It's something else, something about the book itself, there in the right-hand margin, halfway down. A single large capital J. The ink has bled slightly, the impression slightly too strong, so the letter's a little bit smudgy, without the detail and the clarity of the Gothic lettering in the main text block. Nevertheless, I love this J all the more for its blurriness. I'd rather it were this way, characterful, let's call it, than that other J, crystalline, a perfect impression just to the left of it in the main text beginning the name Joachim. Our marginal J has nothing to do with Joachim. It's pure coincidence they should appear side by side like this. In fact, our J is not really a J at all. It's there as a numeral, 1, announcing that this is the first leaf of the book. Our J is the first printed page number, and it will revolutionize the way we use books. And in doing so, it will become such a commonplace that it will almost disappear from view, hiding in plain sight at the edge of every page. What the page number, the printed page number, allows is referencing. It allows us to do footnotes. It allows us to tell our students to footnote this so I can check that you've got the quotation right. It allows us to write to each other to say, I think you're going to love what's on page 46. It allows us to have that knowledge that you can be in New York, I can be in London, we can have a friend in Venice or Cape Town or Sydney, and we can all know that as long as we have a copy of a book from the same edition, we can all be on the same page. The page number allows indexing. And what we find in the late 1400s and the start of the 1500s is suddenly the index that's been around for 200 years gets turbocharged. Every book now, it doesn't need Bible chapters anymore. Every book has something in the corner that allows us to have a good locator with a good degree of granularity. You can find this thing, it's on page such and such. Soon we find indexes to cookbooks, hymn books, to history books, to textbooks, legal books. Here we have Orlando Furioso, the great Italian poem from the start of the 1600s, the start of the 16th century. Here, the English knight Astolfo has been given a spell book by a fairy, and like Chekhov's gun, we know that at some point he's going to need to use that spell book. And sure enough, several chapters later, the knight realizes he's going to have to cast a spell. So what does he do? He took his book and searcheth in the table how to dissolve the place he might be able. And straight in the index for it, he doth look of palaces framed by such strange illusion. That's the 1590s English translation, but indice is the Italian word that Ariosto uses in 1516. So suddenly, by the start of the 16th century, even fictional spell books have got indexes at the back. Everybody is using them, but not everybody is happy. Here's something you might recognize. This is a tweet by Donald J. Trump. You can't find these anymore. I was able to find an image of the top tweet, but there's actually a second tweet here. And because of what happened with Twitter, this is, I can't give you a screenshot of it. Can't even find it. I had to quote this from my own notes. He says, Google search results for Trump news shows only the viewing, reporting of fake news media. In other words, they have it rigged for me and others, so that almost all stories and news is bad. Fake CNN is prominent. Republican, conservative, and fair media is shut out. He goes on to say, Google and others are suppressing voices of conservatives. They're controlling what we can and cannot see. What we have here is an anxiety about indexes, an anxiety that indexes are mediated, that because we can't see who's doing the indexing, they aren't giving us a fair representation. Actually, there was an investigation. The Economist debunked this particular claim, but that fear, that anxiety about indexes goes all the way back. It goes back as far as you like. This is a comment that appears on the final page of a book from 1665. It's a book about the king, the rights of the king in England in 1665. And it says, the reason why there's no table or index added hereunto is that every page in this work is so full of signal remarks that were they couched in an index, it would make a volume as big as the book, and so make the postern gate to bear no proportion with the building. That is, we can't condense the book. We'd have to leave things out. The index would not be a true representation unless the index were the same size as the book. Here's the problem, that because one of the key aspects of indexing is selection, choosing, condensation, what happens to the stuff that gets left out? This anxiety goes back to the 1660s, and in fact it goes back even further. Here's Erasmus, the great European intellectual, Erasmus of Rotterdam, writing in the 1530s. He's written a book that actually takes the form of an index. The whole book is structured in the form of a long table, but it has a preface. And he says in the preface, the reason I wrote the book like this is because many people these days only read the title and the index. So it's a bit of snark there. I had to write the book as an index because these days that's all people read. Here's Galileo 100 years later, groaning about that herd who, in order to learn how matters such as this take place, do not betake themselves to ships or crossbows or cannons, but retire into their studies and glance through an index to see whether Aristotle has said anything about them. And we can find in England Thomas Fuller saying there's a lazy kind of learning which is only indical, when scholars, like adders who only bite the horse's hooves, nibble but at tables, neglecting the body of the book. So there's a laziness that indexes provoke. People aren't learning properly. Alexander Pope in the 1730s has a couplet that index learning turns no student pale. He says, so index learning has become a pejorative idea, and it's students who should be turning pale because they're burning the candle at both ends, getting up first thing at the morning or staying up late at night to learn. Index learning turns no student pale. So you see, we have all sorts of problems, all sorts of anxieties about indexes. Rather like this one here, a contemporary anxiety is Google making us stupid, says Nicholas Carr. Here's the index for our time. Are we not reading properly anymore? This is the anxiety. I'm going to give you an example of this. This is a controversy from 1698 in England, and it's between two scholars, Charles Boyle and Richard Bentley. And what's happened is Charles Boyle, a young aristocrat who's just come out of university, where he actually did quite well, which is unusual for aristocrats. He did so well that the college, Christ Church College in Oxford, have allowed him to publish in their series, to publish a work of classical Greek. And he chooses a book called the Epistles of Phalaris, which are said to be letters written by a Sicilian tyrant called Phalaris in the 4th century BC. And the book comes out, and Richard Bentley, the man on the right, says, well, it's all very well, but he hasn't mentioned the fact that these letters are all fakes. They're forgeries, and we know they're forgeries because of certain details in them. Bentley says that the epistles mention a city that we know wasn't built until the 2nd century BC. He says that the epistles mention a certain type of cup, Tericlean cup, and Pericles, the potter, wasn't around till the 3rd century BC. So there's these anachronisms. They must be wrong. And this enrages Boyle and his university accomplices. So what they do is they publish a book called Dr. Bentley's Dissertation Examined. And they can't really find any flaws in Bentley's argument. It's philologically perfect. The trouble is, it relies on very precise pedantic comparisons, things that you could only really get by looking things up in dictionaries. Pericles, when was he? Certain bits of language, I don't think that word came into usage until long after the 4th century BC. So there's a pedantry, which they call index scholarship. He only knows this stuff because he looked things up, whereas the old aristocratic way of learning the classics, which is to read it and think deeply about it in your armchair, we don't go in for index learning, pedantic looking things up in tables. So this book basically makes fun of Bentley without quite managing to undermine his argument. And at the back, it has an index, a short account of Dr. Bentley by way of index, which is really an index of all of the things that are wrong with Dr. Bentley, with references to where they grumble about those things in the text. His egregious dullness, page 74, page 106, page 119, and so on. His pedantry, as you can imagine, from page 93 to 99, 144, 216. His appeal to foreigners. This was a very bad thing in those days. I fear that my country might be going that way again. Anyway, in the late 17th century, appealing to foreigners was not a good thing. His collection of asinine proverbs, his familiar acquaintance with books that he never saw. So what they have done is, because Bentley is an index scholar, they've produced an ironic index, an attack index, a sarcastic index about why Bentley is such a terrible person. They also complain that he's a second-hand critic, because he's not reading just the classics, he's reading tables of the classics. They call this alphabetical learning. You can see what's going on there, learning that you get by looking something up in a table. Bentley's book has all the pomp and show of learning without the reality. Any person, by the help of leisure and lexicons, can set up for a critic. That is, anyone, if they've got enough time and some tables, can set up for a critic. I take index hunting to be the lowest diversion a man can betake himself to. However, having produced that satirical index, the attackers start to think this was quite funny, an index, a mock index, a comedy index, and it starts to have a bit of a vogue, a bit of a fashion. Oh, we have some more attacks, early 18th century attacks on index learning. It's all the rage to grumble about people who know things from book indexes. But what's happened is the mock index has started to catch on. I'm going to tell you about the transactioneer. One of the people responsible for the index at the back of Boyle against Bentley had more beef. He was very upset with the Royal Society, the new scientific institution in London. In fact, he was upset not with the society itself, but with the society's journal called the Transactions of the Royal Society, which he said had no filter. Instead of just publishing the scientific experiments that went on in London, people could send in, amateur scientists could send in things that they'd observed, the length and the breadth of the country, and these would get published as interesting notes. And William King thinks that this is absurd. And what he does is he starts simply to quote passages from the Transactioneer, thinking that if you give it enough rope, it'll hang itself, that these things are so stupid, its stupidity will become apparent if you simply quote it out of context. I'll give you an example. This is in King's pamphlet, The Transactioneer, but it's actually a direct quotation from a couple of years earlier, an article in the Transactions. Somebody has written in about their walking tour of Cornwall in the southwest of England. In my itinerary from London to Margaret Island, and thence most by the seashore to Land's End to observe what plants each part produced, between Penzance and Macketdew lived one Charles Worth, an apothecary, who, causing a pie to be made of the said poppy, and eating of the said poppy pie whilst hot, was presently taken with such a kind of delirium as made him fancy that most of what he saw was gold. And calling for a chamber pot, being a white earthen one, and having purged by stool into it, he broke it into pieces and bid the bystanders to save them, for they were all gold. So you see what's happened here. Somebody has got smashed on an opium pie and crapped into a pot and believes it's gold. But these were not all the effects of the corniculated poppy, for their man and maidservants, having also eat of the same pie, stripped themselves quite naked, and so danced one against another a long time. The mistress, the apothecary's wife wasn't in on this, the mistress, who was gone to market, coming home and saying, "How now, what is here to do?" The maid turned her breech against her and, purging stoutly, said, "There, mistress, is gold for you." So what King can do with this is he can put that in an index entry, making fun of it. Charles Worth, his man and maid, all merrily beshat. Page 39. There's something just right about the length of an index entry to make fun of a whole paragraph, to epitomize it in this ironic way. So some other entries in the transaction ear index are a china ear picker, page 15. Picking the ears too much, dangerous, same page. That men can't swallow when they're dead. Hogs that shite soap. Cows that shite fire. Mr. Ray's definition of a dildo, page 11. So index snark really is invented by William King between the years 1698 and 1700, and it's still with us. We have some lovely things. Latter Day Snark. This is one for one of my favorite books, an anthology of bad poetry. This is an index entry about a line from late Wordsworth, when Wordsworth has really gone off the boil. Dewsbury, miss, cheats time with stuffed owl, 151. Or this, the historian Hugh Trevor Roper was famous for stuffing his index with snark aimed against his colleagues. Peterhouse College, high table conversation, not very agreeable, main source of perverts, 113. If you bury it in the index, there's a good chance that your colleagues might not see. Or this one, this is my favorite. This is from a book on contemporary British politics. Jonathan Aitken was a Conservative politician in England in the 1990s. Aitken, Jonathan, admires risk takers, 59, goes to jail, 60. What I really like about this is, the index is a place to discreetly bury your snark. The most famous example of this, the one that when I told people I was writing this book, the story that most people told me was about William F. Buckley Jr. and Norman Mailer. It's New York. It's the mid-60s. It's the mayoral election, 1965, if I remember correctly. And suddenly, William F. Buckley Jr., a right-wing intellectual, as a bit of a publicity stunt, enters the race, says that he's going to run. Now, he has no chance of winning, and sure enough, he doesn't. But he makes the whole race more journalistically interesting. He brings a certain celebrity and a certain wit to it. There's the comment, somebody asked him during the campaign, what would you do if you won? And he said, demand a recount. Now, of course, he loses, but then he goes away for a year and he writes a book about it, The Unmaking of a Mayor. And during that writing process, he contacts his frenemy, Norman Mailer, to say, do you mind if I quote some of our correspondence in this book? And Mailer says, yes, I do mind. No, you can't do it. And so when the book comes out, there's a little passage on this, on the fact that Mailer hasn't allowed himself to be quoted. And when the book comes out, William F. Buckley sends a copy to Norman Mailer. And what he's done is at the back in the index against Mailer, Norman, 259 to 320, he's written in red ballpoint pen the word hi, because he knows that the first thing that Mailer is going to do on receiving the book is look himself up at the back. This is called the Washington Read now, when people open a book just to see if they're there at the back. Hi, he says. He's been foiled. He can see Buckley has called his bluff, if you like. Buckley has spotted him looking himself up. Buckley has preempted his narcissistic moment. It's really nice. Lots of people mentioned this story, and when I was writing the book, I assumed that it was apocryphal. And then I discovered that Mailer's library, after his death, had been preserved. It's in the Harry Ransom Center in Austin, in Texas. So I got in touch with the librarian there and said, you don't happen to have Mailer's copy of The Unmaking of a Mayor? And he said, sure enough, we do. And I said, you wouldn't mind just checking on the back page, in the index at the back, whether this is true. And sure enough, it was. So this is one of my favorite things about researching the book, the fact that this thing that I thought was an old wives' tale turned out to be true, and it's still there in a library in Texas. One last thing, though, is I think we need to keep index snark alive. And so when I was producing the book, when you produce any book, you have to pay quite a lot for image rights. Every time you use a picture comes from a library or a picture comes from an archive, and you need to pay for these. I asked the librarian in Austin, Texas about that, and he said, no, you can use that for free. He said, the only thing is, because it contains one single word in handwriting, in manuscript, this isn't just Norman Mailer's book. This is an unpublished Buckley manuscript. So you need to get in touch with William F. Buckley's estate and find out whether they will give you permission to include a photo of this one word of Buckley's handwriting. So I got in touch with Christopher Buckley, his son, who was lovely, incredibly generous, and said, no, that's fine. He said, the one thing, though, is when the book comes out, I'd like you to send me a copy of it. And the book was printed this January, and just before we sent it out, I had a brainwave, and I thought, right, at the back, in red ballpoint pen against his father's name, I've written, hi, just because I think index wit in the age of the computer is something that we should keep alive. I'm going to stop sharing my screen with you now. I'm going to stop talking now, actually. That will do. Would people like to ask me anything about it?
But that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I was laughing aloud and probably disturbing my colleagues in the other space during several bits, and fascinated by many things. Yes, audience members, do please add your questions and comments in the chat area on the right of your screen. If you have minimized it, you should be able to hit that same little clicker and make it appear again. Oh, Maria Daring, thank you for joining in. She asked, did you index your own book?
I didn't. And in fact, I've never indexed a book before. I've done other books. And what I do each time is I use the Society of Indexers. Now, in the UK, we have an organization called the Society of Indexers. In America, there's an organization called the American Indexing Society. And what both of these societies have is a list of all their members and a list of all their members' expertises. So when I did a book on 16th century, it's the book that Sarah mentioned at the start, a book called Book Parts, which is based a lot in the early modern period, in the 16th and 17th centuries. And as you might imagine, then there's quite a lot of Latin, quite a lot of classical languages in. So we found an indexer there who had a classics background. When I did a book on the Oulipo, the French group from the latter part of the 20th century, famous for writing novels without the letter E and things like that, I used an indexer who had French, because indexers not only index your book, but they can also, they're also incredible readers. You know, their job is to give this deep attention to your book. So they spot a lot of mistakes as they go along, which is really helpful too. So I used a professional indexer for this, but Sarah's very kind, and she said that she was laughing along. It is a history of the index, but I hope that it's entertaining, and there are some bits of sort of humor in it. So I wanted an indexer who would get that. And I'd been to, while researching it, to a couple of conferences of the Society of Indexers, and there was a lady there who was on the board. So she was, an indexer with credentials, but who was good fun in the pub afterwards. And I thought, she's the one I want. She's got at the intersection of being of definitely being able to get the tone, you know, thinking sort of wittily about it, but also who'll do a really good job, make sure it's a useful index. So I used a lady called Paula Clark Bain, and Paula is I think she still is training to be a cryptic crossword setter at the same time as being a professional indexer. And the index is so full of Paula's wit and personality. It has anagrams and acrostics and all of the things that you'd expect. It does so much more than just help you to navigate the book. One of the interesting things about talking about Google, talking about index being the precursor, but index is really where anything like Control F jumping through a document came from. That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Hugh of Cher. But I wanted to show that the computer is not yet in a position to take the place of a really good reader, a really good indexer who can do a good job. So alongside Paula's index, I also provided another index for which I used the latest automatic index generating software. Now, I had to do this twice because the first time I used a piece of software, it was so bad that I thought, this can't be, this is too funny. For example, I mentioned Hugh of Cher, who invented the index in 1230. In the index here, I was looking through the C's and I noticed Cher, Cher, as in, do you believe in life after love? And I was thinking, she's not in it, but she was there all the time in the first 3 chapters, and I couldn't figure it out. And I was, oh, Hugh of Cher, this stupid computer. This was so bad that I thought, I can't, I'll need to find if there's better software. And sure enough, that there's slightly better software, which I used to present an automatically generated index as an appendix to this book, but it still has nothing of the sort of usefulness, suppleness, or wit, humanity of Paula's. What it has is basically an enormous list of, well, I only included the A's because it goes for so long. But let me just pick up some of the things that it thought might be useful. All the letters, 106. Algorithms, crude, 100. Amusement, mere, 198. You see, all it can do is is pick out phrases, whereas Paula's, sorry, this is a long rambling answer, but no, I didn't index my own book. I did a much better thing, which anybody who writes a book should do. Either get Sarah to do it overnight, like she did for her husband's theatre book, or go to the ASI, go to the American Society of Indexing, because there you will get somebody who has expertise in the subject, but also expertise in how to present, to compile an index.
Believe me, had we known of the availability of that service at the time, we would have taken advantage of it. But there we go. That's fantastic. I'm going to jump in with Laura Miner's question here, because I was also curious about this. So you were talking about, of course, the larger issue of there's no page numbers that are consistent between copies of a book until printing, which I think most of us who read are aware of, but don't really think about. So it kind of blows your mind. But also, prior to the printing press, there were, I believe, no chapter and verse divisions in the Bible, right? That's in English translation in the 16th century, or more or less, right? So Hugh of Cher could index by page, but not by chapter, and therefore, what turns it from an index into a concordance?
The
is really
chapter division, standardized chapter division, really comes in probably the year 1204, certainly round about the start of the 1200s. An English monk who goes to Paris, called Stephen Langton. He'll later come back and be Archbishop of Canterbury, but when he's in the University at Paris, he provides the chapter division that pretty much we still use. Now, we're not talking about chapter and verse. Verses come in the middle of the 16th century, a printer called Henri Estienne, but chapters are there. And chapters are what the friars of the Saint-Jacques Concordance use. Chapters really are part of preparing the way for the index 20 or 30 years later. So that first Bible concordance will give you a reference that tells you what book it is, so Job, what chapter it is, and then divides each chapter notionally into sevenths. So if it's a very long chapter or a very short chapter, it doesn't matter, but it will tell you book, chapter, and a letter from A to G, which is how many sevenths of the way through. So something that's in the middle of, say, Genesis 1 would be Gen 1D, because it's roughly halfway through the chapter. So other things that we used were paragraph numbers. These are really interesting because these are actually to do with the text. Page numbers are completely text agnostic. A page number won't tell you anything about, I mean, pages can be split with a hyphen, split halfway through a word. So its page numbers are a totally arbitrary division of the text, whereas a chapter, whether it's a chapter of the Bible or whether it's a chapter of Augustine or whatever, still has something to do with, oh, that's the chapter where such and such happens, or that could be a long chapter or something. Page numbers are so interesting because, a bit like alphabetical order, it's a projection of something completely arbitrary. It won't tell you anything about what's there. It's a really big deal, I think, starting to apply alphabetical order to the Bible, because it goes completely against the sort of theological idea of trying to find God's truth in things. Here we just say, don't care about that. I'm just going to put it in, you know, every word can have its own place based on how it's spelt. It's a really big projection of arbitrariness, and the page number is the same thing again. Don't care what you're saying. Just you are, 4 pages into it. It's a really big intellectual leap to say, okay, this is about the materiality of the book rather than about the content of the book.
Yeah, thank you. That's extremely well put. Someone asked, have you ever seen indexes
yeah,
that reference footnotes?
definitely. What you do, so what Paula does for mine, but a common way of doing it is, if it's a footnote, say it's you have text on page 211, the index might say 211 for the text, but if it's the footnote on 211, footnote 4, it might go 211 N4. So yeah, there's a kind of convention for how to reference footnotes. I think in my book, the picture captions might be in italics. The things that aren't in the main text, there are sort of conventions on how to represent that in an index.
Yeah, makes sense. How do most contemporary indexers train to do that? Is there a school for it?
Have training programs. So it's a really good question. And if anyone actually is interested in it as a career, the thing to do is to go on the, I think I call them the American Indexing Society. I think it's the other way around, ASI, the American Society of Indexing, or in the UK, the Society of Indexers, and they have training programs. Get in touch with them. That's part of what they do, is to train people up. A really interesting thing that I don't talk about much in my book is how this professionalization came about. It really happens, one of those things that happens pretty much overnight. It's London, 1894, I think. In my book, up until, gosh, chapter 6, it's all men, God, just men. But if you go to a conference of indexers, or if you look at the member list of these societies I'm mentioning, they're 80-90% female. And that switch happens in the 1890s. In the second half of the 19th century, in my country, in England, we have education acts. So everybody has to have some schooling. So by the 1880s, everybody knows a bit how to read. But women are still excluded from most professions. Women aren't allowed to do many jobs. And so at the start of the 1890s, end of the 1880s, start of the 1890s, secretarial agencies spring up, partly to do with the birth of the typewriter, but all of this copying that I said used to be done by monks, actually we start to get female secretaries. This is one avenue of bureaucratic work that will be open to women. And there's a lady called, I've suddenly forgotten her. This is at exactly the worst moment. I've forgotten her name. She's called, is she called Sally Bailey? I'm so sorry. This is a fascinating. Anyway, a woman opens an agency training people to become indexers. She got into it herself, and she says, this is work that women can do. I can train women to do this. And she starts to advertise it like that. And the papers write about her, not just here, but in the States. There's lots of stories about the wonderful woman indexer. And people come to her. Another index agency run by a lady called Mary Petherbridge opens a couple of years later. And suddenly, if you look at the census of what jobs people do, the indexer, there's a few entries, but up until the 1890s, they're all men. From 1901, 1911, 1921, it's majority female. Suddenly, thanks to this lady called Sally, and I forget, I'm such an idiot, her name escapes me now, but almost overnight, this is a job, women can do it, and not only that, you can do it at home, not only that, you can do it if you are returning to work, if you have children. It's something you can be sort of flexible about. And that's still I think, one of the reasons why it allows us a certain type of flexibility. Yeah, it's got this inspirational lady whose name...
Nancy Bailey. I'm told by
Nancy
Bailey, it looks like. I'm told by someone
in
the chat, not me.
In the chat.
No, and yes, thank you. And yeah, audience members, if you want the link to the American Society or Society that was mentioned earlier, that link is also now in the chat. Thank you very much. Good. So I was just going to mention one more thing, because knowing our audience, I suspect we've got a lot of readers of Nabokov. And one of the things I always think of in thinking of joke or snark indices, I'm going to indexes, I'm going to fix it, pretentious moi. Anyway, indexes is, of course, in his book Pale Fire, where it has a central text that's supposedly the text, but the story is actually told in the footnotes in the index. So that's a little bit of a puzzle, I think, where you're meant to read the index as part of the text. Are there other books like that? Do you love Pale Fire? Anything else to throw in
wonderful,
about
because possibly a clue to who the main character is there in the index. I think Nabokov says this early. He says nobody spotted this, but Kinbert is actually Botkin, and it's there in the index or something like that. The index ends with this wonderful, it goes from being this sort of witty camp tour de force to having this incredible, sad, moving, rug pulling from under you moment at the end, where the last entry of the book, the last words of the book are the last index entry, Zembla, a distant northern kingdom, and there's no page number there. It ends incomplete. Now, the trouble with this is when Nabokov's wife translated the novel into Russian, the Z sound for Zembla isn't the last letter of the Russian alphabet, it comes somewhere near the middle. And so how does she finish this? Because she can't say Zembla, a distant northern kingdom, and have that ending. And so I mentioned in the book that the sort of hoop she jumps through to keep that, you know, the idea of nostalgia, of rootlessness, of exile for Zembla as the final note of the book. But we've spoken a little bit about alphabetical order. Different alphabet systems mean that you can't do the same thing. If the place is going to be called Zembla, then it can't be the last word in the book. So that's nice. Yeah, I love books with index. Actually, this is how the project started. I did a PhD about a group called the Oulipo, this group of avant-garde French writers, and it struck me a little later that a few of their novels have indexes. Georges Perec's masterpiece, Life a User's Manual, has a couple of indexes. A book by the American member of the group, a man called Harry Matthews, called The Sinking of the Erdrich Stadium, has an index. And Calvino, Italo Calvino's last novel, Mr. Palomar, has a table of contents. And I thought, it's funny the way that this group, this avant-garde society, are drawn to novels using indexes in their novels, because we all know novels shouldn't have indexes. So it was in the course of writing that I thought, I better just check some things on history of indexes. So I asked my colleagues, what's the standard history of the index? And they all said, I don't know, I don't think it's been written. And that was the impetus. I thought, oh dear, well, somebody better do that then. So 8 years later, here we are.
That's fantastic. Well, I think we'll draw gently to a close there, unless there's anything else you would like to add that hasn't been said yet. But I'd like to say on behalf of the library, thank you so much, Dennis Duncan, for joining us from the UK. Thank you, audience members, for joining us from all over. And anything else you want to toss in?
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm very, very proud to have spoken at the New York Society Library. So thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.